Welcome to the Western Bowl podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only, and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled, Just This and the Practice of Assertion. The talk was given by Matthew Files on October 5th, 2024 via Zoom. Matthew facilitates groups that support people to look deeper into their process, formulate their own questions, and become responsible for their choices. In this talk, he speaks about just this, or the practice of assertion given by his teacher, Lee Lozowick, as the recognition of what is real in every moment. He states that what is real to ego is everything that maintains the illusion of separation from what is, in ways such as projection, judgment, and meaning-making. Matthew says that just this is strong medicine to pierce such illusions, and that it can be used at any time. He also speaks about different ways of practicing assertion through the statement, "This is real," in the midst of completely natural bodily activities that do not essentially involve ego. He notes that just this is not a remedy, but that it needs a framework, a matrix to arise in that is built by traditional practice. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Matthew Files.
Just this and the practice of assertion. First thing I wanted to say about it, which I think is a very important thing to remember, particularly about topics like this. It's a quote from Werner Erhard, which is that understanding is the booby prize. So ideas like this in the Dharma can often be very easily understood conceptually, but not really gotten organically, bodily. You get caught up in the Dharma, in spiritual speak. I know this from personal experience, and it's easy to become very glib with the language and feeling like I have understanding of it, when it's just what we might call head knowledge. So that's sort of a caveat, is that understanding is the booby prize. So the practice of assertion. This is a practice that was given many years ago by my guru, Lee Lozowick. And the language to the practice of assertion is just this. That's it. That's the whole thing. So he called it assertion because what's being asserted is the recognition of what's real in every given moment. And who or what you're asserting it to is consciousness. So there's a lot that is real that we're just not aware of. It's not in our register. It's out of focus, out of view. And it's very easy to just fixate on the three-dimensional physical realm as everything that's real. Everything we see, feel, hear, touch, emote, sense, and that's it. That's the limit, the scope of what's real. And yet we are multidimensional beings. And yet we only tend to relate to the realness of everything in maybe one dimension. And we don't take into consideration anything else. So the assertion of what's real. Well, what's meant by real? Well, sometimes I find it easy to approach that through the back door in a sense of like, what's not real? What's real to ego is everything it does to maintain the illusion of separation. That's what's real to ego. So to engage this practice, you have to subscribe to this idea that there actually is such a thing as the illusion of separation. A separation from what is as it is here and now, which is the language of Arnaud Desjardins and his guru, Swami Prajnapad. And Lee often equated that phrase of just this, and it's actually Swami Prajnapa's language, I believe, accepting what is as it is here and now. But in using that phrase, what are we taking into consideration as what is? So the acceptance of what is here and now. So what is? What is that about? What's the what of what is? So you've got to get to an appointment. You're in a hurry, aren't we all? And you get stuck in a traffic jam. So you sit there and you go, okay, I accept what is. Or you say, just this, stuck in a traffic jam. But that's really only taking into consideration this much of reality, of what's in front of you. And in a sense, it's really actually a misuse of the practice. It's a mispractice because in that kind of situation, it's being used as a remedy to tension, the anxiety of your situation of being late for this appointment and being stuck in traffic. Whereas the practice itself of just this is pointing to something completely different than that. It's pointing more to a context, to a way of being, than trying to remedy our way out of an uncomfortable, unpleasant, anxious situation. So it's not a technique. It's not a technique to get you somewhere. This practice of just this practice of assertion, much like meditation. I mean, there are meditation techniques, but the practice of meditation that I'm familiar with is not a technique to get me somewhere. It's not a remedy for something, which is what most techniques are about.
Yeah, assertion. What are we asserting? How does this connect with just this? How does it connect?
This is why this talk gets very difficult, because the just thisness of things, of life, doesn't lie in language. But we're using language to try and describe it, to try and flesh this thing out. So the statement of just this being an assertion, well, let me tell you what it isn't. It's not an affirmation. This kind of thing, when you're trying to improve your life and become a better person in a sense, or become happier. And it's not like the saying of a mantra that you repeat over and over again. Just this, just this, just this. So it's talking to consciousness and telling consciousness that you do so know what's real. This is the practice. So is that actually going to be what's happening when you first start out doing it? No, probably not. Not at any kind of conscious level.
Yeah, what you said reminded me of the Aborigines in Australia, naming everything into existence. As they walk along, they say, well, there's the big gum tree. Every time they walk by, there's the big gum tree. It's like Harold and his purple crayon creating reality as they go by naming it. It sounds like you're saying you're asserting reality.
Yes, asserting reality is exactly what is happening. Like any practice, whether it's a practice that you have in some art form, the more you practice, the more you embody it, the deeper it goes. So if you've taken up some kind of art form, basically when you start off, you're not going to be very good at it. And it takes time and it takes repetition and commitment to the practice to allow that art form to have a much deeper expression. And it's the same thing with any practice, the same thing with meditation. Anybody who's meditated for a while knows that it changes over time. It becomes deeper and richer.
And not to be too simplistic, but could you say, what is the reason that we're doing this?
I was afraid someone's going to ask that question. Well, I can tell you why I do it, or why I'm engaged in any kind of spiritual practice at all, is because I think there's more to this life than what I'm seeing at any given time. And that the way I see life is full of illusion and projection and judgment and meaning making. Another quote from Werner Erhard: life is empty and meaningless. And the fact that life is empty and meaningless is empty and meaningless. But as human beings, we give meaning to everything. And to me, the assertion of just this is the assertion of no meaning. There's no meaning behind it. It's only this being in the given moment. Nothing else, nothing added, nothing taken away. But there's layers, there's just so many layers upon layers of meaning that it's very clear I've given to life, to everything I come across. The whole reason for doing these kinds of practices is to pierce those illusions, pierce those projections, those layers upon layers of deception that get in the way of accessing what is actually real about life. That's why. How about for you? Why would you do a practice like this?
It sounds like it's something that can help us become present more often, which is a good thing, right? That's real good.
It seems so, yeah. That's what all the spiritual literature tells me, that that's a good thing. Being present is a good thing.
You were asking, why would you do this? And I just started thinking about why I got into this. And for me, I just felt the pervasiveness of suffering and misery in the world. It seemed the attempt was being made constantly to cover it over. And in my own case, particularly. And then having heard the teaching in different traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, the Gurdjieff work, Sufism, that there's another possibility, that there's a deeper self. What does that mean? I hesitate to use language like this because it doesn't do it justice at all, but I think language points to something. And I've come to experience at times, and I think have some sense that the layers of separation can be pierced, and of having that just naturally fall away sometimes, a sense of separation. And just this, for me, takes me back to that experience, so to speak, of there just being an eternal present. If one lives in the present, there's just this. I don't know that that's the experience of different masters throughout history, but it seems like there's something to that. Just being in the present eternally, just this. So the phrase to me causes me to reflect on a deeper reality than the one that I'm experiencing at the moment when I'm thinking it. It just arises spontaneously for me.
Yeah. Talking about being present, one of my first spiritual books, maybe it was for other people too, was the book Be Here Now by Ram Dass. I think I read this back in 73 or 4 or something like that. And how do you be here now? How do you be present? But one of the things that I'm looking at is the body. And the body is always in the present. This physical body is always in the present. So to be fully embodied with everything that's going on in all dimensions is to be here now, is to be present.
Well, that's kind of amazing because I used to think that, wow, I'm not the body. I have to transcend that in some way. But when you start to examine yourself and this more deeply, that becomes clear that without living in the body fully, this teaching is pure mentalization. And just in terms of how we live, coming from mind, there's a past, present, and future, and we're not in the present very much. At least that's my experience. Most of the time, I'm somewhere else in my head. And the practice does tend to bring me back to the present. I don't know if that's the full intention of it, but it tends to do that.
I'm not sure what the full intention is either. of the practice.
The illusion of separation basically, in my experience, turns my back on God. It's like fundamentally my issue is I've got this. Thank you. No, thank you, God, or anybody else. I've got this. Don't bother me. So seeing the result of that not working for me in my life and having to turn toward God, which might just be that I need some help. When you said asserting to consciousness, to me, it's we're here to say hello again versus no, thank you.
Okay, here's the exact quote. So by acknowledging what is obviously real, you are saying to consciousness that you can recognize what is real in principle. So that's just a good quote. I'm not going to elaborate on that. I really like optical illusions. One of my favorite optical illusions, maybe people are familiar with it. It's an image, a 3D image of a cube where one side is shaded. And if you look at it, that shaded side is in the back. And if you look at it long enough, all of a sudden that shaded side pops in the front and the rest of the cube is in the back. And there used to be, back in the late 70s, early 80s, there were these 3D pictures, photographs that were very popular. And you'd look at these pictures and you'd stare at them for a long time. And all of a sudden this 3D image would sort of pop into view. Funny thing about those optical illusions, I find, is that the harder I try to look at it, nothing happens. But once I start to relax my vision, relax my brain, the way I'm looking at the optical illusion, all of a sudden it pops. And I didn't do anything except relax. I'm not grasping to try to see this image differently. And for me, there's a key in that, to that approach to particularly practices like this, about just this. So the grasping to understand it, the grasping to figure it out actually gets in the way. It's like doing a practice relaxed rather than doing a practice to try to get somewhere. To me, it makes all the difference in the world. It actually makes the essence of the practice available to me, or more available to me, than trying to grasp understanding, trying to make something happen.
Would asking questions and just this be mutually exclusive?
Asking questions, how do you mean?
Like, why wouldn't make sense, or asking for a reason wouldn't make sense. It's just this. So it seems like it brings relief from any questioning. Is that the case?
Yeah, I could go along with that. It's interesting, the practice of inquiry. I mean, Ramana Maharshi had this practice of who am I? It's a very common question used in different traditions. And Lee's version of it was, who am I kidding? And the practice of inquiry and assertion are very tied together. So it's interesting that you bring up having a question. So in one sense, I would say, yeah, the practice of assertion would eliminate a lot of questions. And at the same time, there is the essential question of who am I, or who am I kidding, which ties in very nicely because they both take you to the same place. One aspect of the practice of assertion, of just this, is that there's nothing missing right now. Right now, right this very second, there's nothing missing. And yet, so much of my spiritual life has been made up of something's missing. And I need to get somewhere or attain some different point of view, some higher perspective, grasp some deeper meaning to stuff. But the whole practice of assertion negates all that. It doesn't actually negate it. It actually includes it. And because it includes it, there's nothing missing in this moment, in this second.
Or in me.
Or in me, yeah.
Seems like the ultimate reminder.
It is. It is the ultimate reminder. And my understanding of it is that once we really get that, there's no longer anybody to be reminded. There's no reminding that has to happen anymore. But I don't know because I'm not there. But everything I've read tells me that. And everything I've heard about the topic tells me that. Some more notes. So this is not particularly very practical subject matter, this practice of assertion. It's not answering any how-to questions. It's not answering how to be more compassionate or loving or caring or how to manage the struggles of life better, because that's not what it's about. It's actually about piercing all those illusory struggles.
So I have a sign that I love and it says, "This is it."
This is it?
This is it.
Okay.
How would you say that differs from just this? Because it feels like it has a different flavor, but I haven't sat with it long enough. So I just wanted to hear your take.
Why don't you start? Because I don't have a sense of that yet. Do you have a little bit of sense of the difference?
I don't know. The feeling I get is just this seems more open in a way for some reason. Just this, as opposed to this is it.
I could easily make them mean both the same thing to me. The only reason I'm using the language of just this is because that's the language my guru used. But there are other languages in other traditions that address the same thing.
For me, as far as overarching affirmations, I have long loved, thanks for everything. I have no complaints whatsoever. Seems related in some way.
Yeah. And I have this idea of the inclusiveness of just this includes complaints. If complaints are what is arising, abiding in or coming from or living in the context of just this, to me, includes all that.
We're talking about an arising to acceptance of what is.
An acceptance of what is as it is here and now. Yeah. Then the question becomes, how do I know I'm really doing that? How do I know I'm not kidding myself about accepting what is? Maybe I'm not seeing the whole picture of what is. These are thoughts that arise in my mind, but that's just a whole lot of thinking.
Yeah, to me, that's likely. And my question was, if we don't use it as a technique, is it enough to just start where we are? Because that's where we are.
Yeah. Where else are you going to start? Say, you take up a practice like this and you're using it like a mantra. You're just sitting there going, just this, just this. And then you find out that, it's really not meant to be used that way. Well, then you can shift, but that's where you started. Like you said, you got to start somewhere.
What you said reminded me that we can accept whatever's happening, which comes back to we don't need to change anything.
Right.
But it could be that any practice has multifacets to it. One being that we accept all that's happening and complaining is included. One is that the mood could be that everything works. Whatever's arising is workable or works. We just go with it. And there's gratitude there. It's interesting how it doesn't have to be one thing either.
And I'm not actually sure that it involves not changing anything. So if I am being a complete asshole, I might want to consider changing that activity. At the same time, I can completely accept being that asshole, and maybe some changes are needed.
The hard part for me in all this is that when we accept what is, that we're being an asshole, and we accept that fully, the next moment provides a whole nother experience.
Yes, it does. The phrase is just this. Just what? Just this. What's this? This is whatever is as it is here and now. The phrase is just this. Just means nothing else. No options, no alternatives. Just this. What does that mean? It means that in reality, in fact, there isn't anything except just this.
Maybe that's the difference. Like, this is it. It sort of sounds like it's saying what this is. It's it.
Yeah. You could say this is it as a question, like, this is it? Got ripped off here.
Could just this be a light, the light that brings us to self-observation?
I think I would take it the other way around.
Okay, self-observation would take us to just this?
Mm-hmm.
All right, it would be the light to bring us, okay.
Yeah. Here's a little bit using the language of accepting what is, as it is, here and now. It's a very attractive phrase. It's a phrase that were we to think about it seriously, even for a few minutes, would appear to be very clear, completely understandable. Since we are all intelligent, the mind says, accept what is as it is, here and now. Okay, I can do that. We're sitting in our car in a lot of traffic, and it's obvious to us that we're not going to get where we want to go on time, and we say, I accept there is traffic on the road today. I accept, but we don't. Do we see our unconsciousness? We never stop to consider that what is doesn't mean what we see with our eyes and hear with our ears only. It doesn't mean the external circumstances that we find ourselves in only. So we fixate on the body only and everything that's associated with the body, the mind, all of our thinking, all of our emotions, all of the senses. And then, of course, we extend that at some point to all our possessions, which is why it's so hard to get rid of certain possessions, because they're me. They hold so much meaning, so much memory. They mean so much. And if I get rid of this, who will I be without this memento from high school? All that stuff that reinforces who I take myself to be. I see hands.
It strikes me that not accepting just is what blocks us from being in the now. Not accepting something that's happening, like I'm stuck in a traffic jam, throws me out of the now.
Yes, and that piece was also, to me, suggesting that the whole idea of accepting what is bigger than just the acceptance of my immediate circumstances. Most circumstances are relatively easy to do that with. But whatever the circumstance is, it's not just about the circumstance. The context of accepting what is much, much bigger than that, although it includes that.
I'm thinking that accepting what is, or really living just this, is not possible unless one is completely surrendered, whatever that means. And if one is completely surrendered, then one is just in the present and in relationship with what is in that situation. Dualistically looking at it, like I'm thinking about just this, or accepting what is, I'm doing that. I think we can be pretty glib about that. I'm accepting that I'm in this traffic jam or something.
Yeah.
I was actually in a car accident day before yesterday. And in that moment, I was not thinking about just being present. A lot of different emotions were going on and thoughts. And it wasn't until a bit later that I remembered, oh, just this. I think we get tested. People say a lot in the spiritual field that they're in this place of surrender or accepting what is. And I think we get tested, and then we just work with that. But also, my understanding is that there's no proof of this except our actual experience. So as I go along and realize that I'm in my mind, the practice helps me re-engage. And humor seems like such an important thing, like not to take it so damn seriously. But on the other hand, it is, I mean, it's my life. It's our life. And is there more than just this?
What else would there be? Just that?
Well, I mean, just this in a freaking crazy world. And
Just this, that, and the other thing?
running on a treadmill at the YMCA and seeing everybody.
Oh, yeah, that's a good story. The first time I ever went to like a big gym, I was living in Boulder, and there was this big 3 stories, all this different stuff. And I'd never been in one of these places before. People exercising. And there was these stations of treadmills and bicycle things. And in front of every station, there was a screen, a video screen. And I looked at that and I went, oh, I get that. People want to get in shape, but they don't really want to be there. Video screen, the earbuds, they don't actually want to be in the sweating, painful, aching body that's doing the treadmill and doing the bicycle. They don't want to be there, so they got the big TV screen. That was a funny thing to see.
I notice as I roll through life that the ability to not have some sort of stimulation is becoming pretty obviously a problem.
You like stimulation.
I guess that's what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
It becomes that habit. It becomes the thing you were talking about of wanting to change. There's a ball that gets rolling of, well, let's just listen to something as I'm driving. You know, let's listen to the Western Vowel podcast while I'm driving.
Right.
There are worse things.
There are worse things. Here's another thing on just this. Just this means just this. No opinion, no editorializing, no moral judgments, no judgments of any kind. Nothing subtracted, nothing added. Just this. If you are one with the feeling that you are referencing in the relative world, then you are not feeling it in the same way. Just this is an assertion, a statement, a practice, and the reflection of reality in words. It is the ghost image of reality in words. In the moment of the phrase, just this, it means whatever this is in that moment, which includes you as you are and everybody else as they are, and the world as it is, and the microbes that live on Mars in the moisture, that in billions of years will become intelligent creatures. So it's just this.
It's the epitome of surrender.
Yeah, and it really points to the bigger picture of what is rather than what's just right in front of me or what's happening interiorly in me. Talking about the microbes on Mars, that kind of thing, or any other dimension of reality that we might not be consciously aware of. There is the acceptance of all that as well.
Your example of, are you kidding yourself? I think is what you said. I mean, that's just this as well, right? So it seems like something comes up and it feels like an exception to just this, as opposed to a continual just thising. So when you say, oh, am I kidding myself? That's just this also.
It is.
There was a description of a crayon or defining reality as we walked along. And somebody who gave a talk quite a while ago regarding inquiry and such was this idea that we were actually erasing the crayon with the practice. We were erasing the definitions as we went along.
There's another aspect of the practice of assertion that I wanted to get to tonight. So there is the practice of just using that phrase, just this, which can be used at any time, any place. It's not like you have to go out and sit on a mountaintop. Just this can be done anywhere. But there's another aspect of this practice of assertion, which doesn't use the language of just this. It uses the language of this is real. And it's very specific. It was another aspect to the practice of assertion that Lee had given out many years ago, which was to be used at specific times, interestingly enough. And it was sitting down to eat, when you first wake up, when you're just falling asleep, in times of extreme physical pain, and when you're using the toilet. Well, you might not be using the toilet. You could be outside in the woods. But when you're peeing or defecating, just to say, this is real. And he was calling this at the time the practice of assertion. And this is something that anybody can do and find out what the results are for themselves. But it's an interesting thing what this practice is addressing. Because if I look at the times he was referencing to do it, they're completely natural, organic bodily functions. Going to sleep. What do you do when you're tired? You go to sleep. When you're hungry, you eat. When you drop a 20-pound weight on your foot, you're in pain. Pain is natural. That kind of pain is natural. The pain of not getting invited to somebody's house for dinner is not necessarily natural pain. The pain of being left out is not necessarily natural. It's not the same kind of pain as dropping a 20-pound weight on your little toe or your big toe. And then defecating or peeing. You got to go, you got to go. It does not involve ego at all in those situations. So it's very interesting that he picked out those situations. So this is real. And what is it that's real? When you connect with what's real is nothing to do with ego. Like nothing. Pooping has nothing to do with ego. It's a bodily function that has to be done or you will die. So using that particular practice is a doorway into the whole realm of just this. Those situations are touchstones into that realm, into that context. Also, an interesting thing that I noticed in doing that particular practice, pretty much all of them are key drama, maybe even trauma points in a child's life. All the drama around eating and food, all the drama around bedtime, all the drama about toilet training, all the drama around falling down and skinning your knee. And most of the drama is created by the adults around the child. But there's lots of drama. So even though those are key points for accessing what is real, all that stuff that we have from our childhood, the drama that was layered onto that, somehow we got to get through that to be able to access, to be able to rest in, abide in what is actually real. So that's my own language, but that's what I call the practical version of assertion. It's actually something I can do. I can sit down, and it's not a matter of repeating it through the whole meal. You sit down and just say it once to begin the meal. This is real. That's it. It's not falling asleep and going, this is real, this is real. As you're falling asleep, this is real. The same thing about waking up. And I call them practical because I can do things. The practice of just this, as strong as a medicine as it actually is, it's not real practical. The results are hard to see. Maybe the rest of you aren't as results oriented as I am. But if I don't see results, why bother to keep doing it? I want results. If I'm taking supplements, I want to see results from my vitamin V and vitamin C or my curcumin or whatever it is. But sometimes results on the path are hard to see. Maybe they never get seen because they're happening in another dimension that I'm not even aware of. But I think they should all happen in this dimension that I'm familiar with. And I should see results and become a better person or more holy, or more compassionate or something, more aware, more present, more something that isn't now, that I don't have now. Those kinds of results.
Results are the booby prize.
Results are the booby prize, yeah. So working with the second aspect of assertion, using the language of this is real in these specific moments, I have found much easier to see results in. So I like it. I like the practice because I see results.
To remember to do it during those times that you're referring to, remembering to do it, to say, this is real. I tapped into the first time the sense of assertion, asserting something for myself.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about it. We can talk about, you sit down to eat or you sit down to poop. Hopefully you don't do it standing up. And you say it, this is real. But most likely when you start to do it, you don't have a clue to what's real. Not really, but it's given over time. It's like that optical illusion thing that I was talking about before, and the relaxation around seeing. And if I'm not grasping for the results of this is real and just relaxed around that it comes much easier. It may take a hell of a lot longer. There's that joke t-shirt. My grandma went to Paris and all she brought me was a stupid t-shirt, that kind of thing. And I'm like, I've been on a spiritual path for 45 years and all I have is a stupid t-shirt. That's how results seem to me at times.
What about body sensations and saying this is real to them?
Well, could be. However, it's a much wider doorway using it with bodily functions rather than sensations.
What do you mean by wider doorway?
The way I look at using assertion and using the language of this is real, it's like a doorway to the context of just this, of what is real in all of life. So it's a doorway. You can look at it as a labyrinth as well. So to me, using those instances which involve a strictly bodily function, it's not as labyrinthian as strictly sensations. And don't take my word for it. I encourage you to prove it for yourself. Compare the two. But don't just take my word for it, because all I have is my experience of it.
Being on a treadmill or just working out is boring. It's not unpleasant. It's just boring. Anyway, so I just wanted to give a different take on why people have earbuds or why I have earbuds, but that's not the main point. You spoke about doing just this and you brought up the idea of results with it. And I think that to bring in the idea of results with just this is not useful. If I did just this, I wouldn't be doing it for results. It would be just the doing of it. And enough doing of it, it becomes a habit with repetition.
Do people really do things without wanting results? Which is what you were implying. And that is, to me, unfathomable. To just do something without any inkling of some result or some benefit for me.
I remember being told to do things and do them and see what happens, not knowing what, if anything, would happen. Give it a good solid time that you do it. And if you find it useful, maybe continue. And if you don't find it useful, you don't continue it. There's things that I do because of faith in life or faith in the guide who's instructing me. We haven't mentioned faith, but faith is enormous. So I know that faith has been an important part of the work. Or the whole thing to me is based on faith when I come to think of it. So anyway, I'm not sure if that's my point number 2 that I forgot, but anyway, that's it.
We've been talking a lot about number 2s.
Well, so faith in what? And most of us are raised to look at God as a being outside of ourselves and not to be comfortable with the body, and that there's an individual ego that's going to get saved and go to heaven. But this teaching is radical in our culture, seems like to me. And it's consistent in Zen and Tibetan Buddhism that it's about ultimate reality or God, in some traditions, being right here now, not someplace else. So to start to work with that and with just this, Is that enough to just remember that once in a while? One of the quotes that you had, and I just wanted to raise this before we end, was, if we attempt to practice just this without benefit of traditional disciplines, we're unlikely to make any headway. Would you explain your perspective on that?
Yeah. My perspective is that the traditional practices are the matrix, the framework that allows just this to arise in. There has to be that framework. Something has to be built to allow the type of medicine that the practice of assertion is. Can't have its full effect unless there is that structure built by traditional practice.
It sounds like you're saying that you build a matrix or build some capacity to be able to actually use the practice of just this.
I wouldn't say to use it, because I don't think it's something that's used. It's more like for it to actually have effect. Stephen Jenkinson has this thing, he's got a little booklet on it, but it's entitled Human Beings Are Made, They're Not Born. So I look at spiritual work as the making of human beings. So when we're first being born, maybe we might say we're subhuman. So becoming human is what we're building through practice, traditional practices. That's the structure. That's the matrix. It's the human matrix. Truly human, not just having a body. Because there are several billion bodies on the planet. They're not necessarily all human. And I'm not talking about extraterrestrials and walk-ins.